Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's a big one. We're going to be talking about the newest album from Janelle Monae called Dirty Computer. You know, I remember referencing Afrofuturism in brief when talking about Janelle Monae and her past couple albums, the underlying Cindy Mayweather stories that have served as a time-traveling narrative undercurrent to those albums, taking the tropes and aesthetics of 50s and 60s sci-fi and fusing it with modern language, taking the textures of R&B and funk and soul of the 70s and 80s and bringing them into a swirling, modern, neon genre fusion with rock and modern R&B, and at its core was the swirling, magnetic, infectious charisma of Janelle Monae. And there's a part of me that feels like kind of owe her an apology. Now, to some of you that might seem a little confusing. I have openly been a fan of Janelle Monae for years, ever since her guest appearance on Idlewild by Outkast. I would put both the Arcandroid and the Electric Lady on year-end lists. I would not hesitate to put her on the list of one of the most defiantly unique and potent artists of the 2010s, both in terms of raw talent and experimentation. And that's even before you consider how she has not compromised her pop sensibility. And yet, going back to my review of the Electric Lady 5 years ago, just when I was first starting out on YouTube, I didn't even have a proper camera. There is a part of me that's not all that proud of it. Primarily because how I treated the underlying metaphors and themes at the core of the album. Not that I didn't get it. The queer black femininity at its core was always really apparent, and Janelle Monae just did a wonderful job exploring the nuances through the larger metaphors of her story, but I feel like a lot of the language I chose in the review was kind of minimizing, especially given how deeply personal said narrative had turned out to be for her. Now, for me, it was more paying attention to the mechanics of that story, that narrative to the album, looking for a weightier external payoff rather than realizing the true thematic and emotional arc was internal for her. And while some of that could be explained due to the theatrical artifice of that narrative and some of her presentation, I really should have realized the inward shift of the metaphor and the presentation that was likely far more representative of what explorations of queer black femininity and sexuality really are. And so now let's fast forward to 2018, and it should be a surprise to nobody that so much of the coded theatricality is just gone. The institutional pressures have redoubled both internally and externally, causing that exhausted strain, and flagrant urgency now becomes a necessity. More than that, Janelle Monae has only grown into a more assured and confident artist, both into her forays in acting and film, and even her steps into the mainstream R&B with the Ephus EP in 2015. Yes, I personally preferred more of the fantastical sci-fi aesthetic and genre blending, but you know what? Raw charisma can compensate for a lot, and really, that EP's not bad. And thus for Dirty Computer, there was a part of me that knew that this record wouldn't quite be the same sort of Afro-futurist affair as her previous albums, especially with the lead-off singles. It looked to be, for lack of better words, more conventional and accessible. Now granted, she still released an entire short film to flesh out the greater themes of the album that was very much linked to her conceptual framework on some level, but we're here to focus on the album itself. It has to stand alone. So how is it? So I want to establish a few things before we get into this review proper. If you're expecting the Dirty Computer record to continue the Cindy Mayweather narrative, you're not really gonna get it. And conversely, if you're expecting the extended album movie that Janelle Monae released alongside this album to further expand upon the concept, you're not really gonna get it. If anything, it adds more texture and character to the details. The record definitely can stand on its own. And if I said before, if you've been hearing that this is easily Janelle Monae's most accessible record to date, and yet doesn't quite have the same indelibly unique flair that made the Arcandroid, the Electric Lady so damn compelling, well, that's half right. This is a more accessible release, but if you think Janelle Monae's style and presence doesn't infuse every inch of this album to make it easily one of the best of 2018, you got another thing coming, because this thing kicks ass. I had a ton of fun with it. And that's something I want to stress right out of the gate here, because while you will definitely hear some trap percussion and thicker bass slide into the hip-hop leaning songs on this record like Django Jane and segments of I Got the Juice, Janelle Monae, she is way too smart of a composer and a producer to not interject more of her unique brand of gleaming synthesizers, elegant strings, razor-tight guitar lines, bass dripping in funk, and absolutely stunning vocal arrangements. And the fact that she gets goddamn Brian Wilson for the opening title track and Take a Bite should be all the proof you need there of the melodic pedigree that she's drawing upon. Yeah, it's a little less open openly theatrical and grandiose than her previous albums, but that's been traded in for some of the most exultant melodic hooks that she has ever leveraged, from the stunning, watery shimmer of crazy classic Life to the slightly noisier guitars behind the 80s synth-funk groove of Take a Byte, from the incredibly wiry synth leads of PYNK that with Grimes flips a late 90s Aerosmith song, to how the electric guitar lead on So Afraid feels imported from 90s alternative rock, until we get a much richer cushion of keys and vocals around that hook, and a synth line that sounds like it was imported from an Ayreon album. It's awesome! And what's truly stunning is how effortless it all feels. Sure, there is a deeper core of anger and tension, fear and melancholy to some of these songs, but Janelle Monae doesn't shy away from how goddamn fun the rest can be, and how she's just reveling in the shimmering blur of synthetic filters and real organic presence. This is definitely a summer record, and I mean that in the highest possible praise. Even some of the ballads, which where I found the Electric Lady could start to drag a bit on its back half, they've been tightened significantly here, with the sultry elegance of the strings arrangement against the firmer funk on Don't Judge Me, preceded by the organ-inflected, trap-infused soul of I Like That, with an acoustic outro that feels wonderfully organic. And you know what? Part of the reason the trap percussion doesn't really bother me so much here is how live a lot of the drums sound. But it's also because Janelle Monae never lets it overwhelm any semblance of groove or flow that she brings to the table. And when you realize this record is easily her shortest by a considerable margin, even on the longer songs, it's amazing how quickly it flows by into the huge guitar-driven soul and funk of the closer Americans. Easily one of my favorites here. The sort of subversive but deeply earnest anthem that Janelle Monae truly earns is an absolutely killer climax. And you know, I have to speak very highly of her performance here. And look, I'll be the first to admit that I really love the paces that she put through a more theatrical delivery on earlier albums, and how raw she could get, like on the ArchAndroid. But Dirty Computer, it's on a different level, not just in terms of charisma, but vocal control and poise and presence, from the sensitive coos of PYNK to the deeper sensuality of Don't Judge Me, to a song like Django Jane, where her more gruff rapping, it's plenty convincing, carrying the sort of intensity and charisma that really comes from a veteran MC. Hell, I'd definitely take her over whatever the hell Pharrell was trying on I Got the Juice. Dude, for as nakedly sexual as that song is, even given some of the biology there, maybe not the best idea to include lines like yell like pee in it. Now granted, his slightly awkward triplet flows are evidence of a lingering question whether if Janelle Monae was stepping into hip-hop, she could have done a little more to push the gauntlet even in that genre. Similar to my issues with Yoga 3 years ago, given how wildly creative she's proven to be, she could push harder in that territory. But hey, it's not like she sounds uncomfortable on these songs here, and frankly, that can be enough. And now we have to get to the content. And make no mistake, given how much this record was projected to trade metaphor and subtext for direct text, I was concerned if and how some of the writing could hold up, and then I remembered this is Janelle Monae. And even if the language is less outwardly poetic or more autobiographical, there's still a lot going on in between the lines here. And for as personal as this album gets, it still coaxes through much of the same sci-fi language and imagery that Janelle Monae has always used, specifically surrounding the metaphors of a dirty computer with respect to herself and her sexuality. Indeed, the most stark and immediate subtext shows in how she places this break with conformity, not just against American society at large, but the religious undercurrents beneath American society. Take a Byte, the obvious example, actively subverting a lot of the Adam and Eve fable with a coyly open playfulness that I really felt was pretty infectious, bending the virgin whore purity complex wrapped around angelic figures with their synthetic bite, and highlighting how nakedly sex negative the whole angel iconography can be. And it's how, no surprise that 2 songs later on Screwed, in the fits of a world collapsing around her, her positivity in that sexual direction leads to the line, "You fuck the world up now, we'll fuck it all back down." But that's because there is a necessary assertion of power on this album. Janelle Monae is all too aware of how in modern society, with everything conflated with sex, and sex itself representative of power, there needs to be a reclamation of her internal pleasure, taking her rightful place at the table on Django Chain, hell, maybe even at the top, and frankly with this album she'd be deserving of it. But then following with the softer, infectious power of PYNK, reflecting upon that femininity and placing it as equivalent. So yeah, it's black, it's queer, it's unmistakably feminine, and anybody who's got a problem with any of those three, they will struggle with how strident Janelle Monae projects this presence, but you dig a little bit deeper and you find an impressive amount of nuance, both intellectual and emotional. I love how on the hook of PYNK she outright says how it's cool boys have the blue in asserting masculinity, most because across this album Janelle Monae doesn't denigrate masculinity's place or value, given how she herself has embraced some masculine identifiers, and that's okay so long as there's balance. I love the reclamation of the red-blue dichotomy of the trans narrative from The Matrix on Screwed to highlight a level of underlying complexity both in terms of sexual euphoria and disruption of a broken system, especially wrapped around the political references in that outro of those in her own community that would seek to restrain her sexuality. And that leads into some of the most compelling emotional drama on this album, because Janelle Monae is not unaware of how her queer sexuality flies in the face of societal constraints, and some of that pressure becomes internalized to conform, from the childhood bullying on the third verse of I Like That to the exclusions from white and male spaces and wild behavior on Crazy Classic Life, and you know some of that applies to the music industry, and that leads to genuine fear and anxiety, from her hesitation to reveal more of her genuine self on Don't Judge Me to those who might just love her disguise, to the subtext easily expands just beyond a lover, to how she acknowledges it would be so easy to conform to that larger system on So Afraid, clean out the glitches and the viruses that make her a dirty computer, as she describes. But she's also keenly aware of those glitches, they make her who she is, and that leads to Americans. I'll not mince words, I love this song. I love how much raw subversion she jams into it, from the direct commentary on the entrenchment of systemic racism and sexism, how it was entangled with religion, to twisting conservative gender norms in the pre-chorus just by her delivering those lines. I love how she reprises the interpolation of Martin Luther King from Crazy Classic Life for new lines, speaking against hypocrisy and systemic betrayals of the American ideal that Dr. King may well have embraced if he was alive today. And I love how the patriotism of Janelle Monae's hook can ring as genuine in the same way that Steve Rogers does with Captain America, spanning from the inclusive, stalwart American dream and ideal, where even the fallen angels can take up that song and be welcome as that metaphor comes back around. And her choice to end the album with a call to sign one's name on the dotted line, that's a call to action. For which America are you gonna stake your name? Folks, this record is gonna pile up a mountain of critical acclaim, and while there is a part of me that would question whether or not it's better than the ArchAndroid, it's still handily one of the best of 2018, hands down. It's the sort of record where I will not complain where it might embrace some more accessible tones, because at its core, this is the sort of inclusive call to arms that makes such framing really damn potent. And yet, it realizes transcendence because at the core of Janelle Monae's performance and production, it has been polished to a mere shine, enhancing those grooves and tones rather than succumbing to them. And when you consider how relentlessly catchy and genuinely fun this album can be to match that pathos, I don't know what else you could want from this. I really don't. It's easily a 9 out of 10, the highest of my recommendations. And even if you haven't previously been a fan, this is a place that is so easy to get on board. It's an album you can take to heart, really at its core. And in 2018, I could not ask for anything more. Definitely check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know I went into a lot of details on this album, and there is so much intricacy into this project that I think a lot of people are missing in the fact that it is a little bit more direct and straightforward. There's a lot more going on beneath the surface that I don't think is getting credit. But yeah, you want to buy the record? Link down there below. I got the poll up there. I'm looking forward to everyone reaffirming how awesome this is. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. Happy to see you guys over. If you guys actually want to see more of that schedule, it's on my Instagram, link down below. Also keep in mind, I have changed my schedule from a per video to a per month structure, so you get more bang for your buck. But until next time, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.